Well, honestly, it's just, not work, is it? Like, what do you even all day? Answer phones? Make coffee? It's hardly a career, darling. The words, delivered with a saccharine smile that never quite reached her eyes, hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. My mother, usually so resilient, managed a tight, pained smile that I knew was costing her dearly. This was typical. A Tuesday afternoon tea, ostensibly to celebrate her recent promotion, had devolved into a thinly veiled dissection of her entire professional life. My Eleanor, had a gift for it, a talent for extracting the raw nerve of insecurity and pressing down with surgical precision. My own life, in contrast, felt blessedly mundane. I was a project manager for a mid-sized tech firm. Long hours, yes, but it was predictable. My partner, Liam, Eleanor's son, was a good man, genuinely kind, but hopelessly enmeshed in his mother's gilded cage. He'd often brush off her comments, calling them, just mum being mum, a phrase that felt increasingly like a shield against the uncomfortable truth. My parents, on the other hand, were a unit. They'd built their lives on quiet mutual respect and unwavering support. My father, a retired architect, and my mother, who had transitioned from nursing into a successful healthcare administration role after years of dedication, were my benchmarks for a healthy relationship. Seeing Eleanor chip away at my mother's accomplishments felt like watching a slow, deliberate demolition. Eleanor's modus operandi was subtle, a constant drip, drip, drip of disdain disguised as concern. I remembered years ago, before Liam and I were even serious, when my parents had finally managed to buy a modest lake house. My father, beaming, had shown Eleanor the blueprints. She'd sniffed, "Oh, so you're building a? How quaint. I suppose it's something for the retirement fund." It wasn't about the house. It was about diminishing their perceived status, their hard-earned success. She'd done the same when my mother had decided to go back to school for her master's degree in her late 40s. "Are you sure you're up to it, dear? These young whippersnappers will be running circles around you." "And for what? So you can manage more hospitals?" The implied, "You're too old, it's too late, and it's ultimately pointless," was deafening. My mother had simply smiled, adjusted her glasses, and said, "It's never too late to learn, Eleanor." I had admired her strength, but also felt a creeping frustration at Eleanor's relentless negativity, a negativity Liam seemed incapable of truly seeing. He'd offer a weak chuckle, a shrug, and change the subject, leaving my mother and me to absorb the fallout. The psychological toll was real. My mother, bless her, had developed a habit of downplaying her achievements. When asked about her job, she'd often preface her answer with something like, "Well, it's not as glamorous as Liam's, but it keeps me busy." It was as if Eleanor's pronouncements had lodged themselves deep within her, a constant whisper of inadequacy that my mother, despite her outward composure, couldn't entirely silence. For me, it manifested as a simmering resentment, a constant vigilance against Eleanor's barbed comments, and a growing protectiveness of my mother, a feeling that bordered on an urge to shield her from a storm she didn't deserve. I'd learned to bite my tongue, to offer a supportive hand on my mother's arm, to change the subject with a forced brightness that fooled no one, least of all myself. The incident, as it turned out, was not a single, explosive event, but rather a meticulously planned, almost theatrical unfolding. It involved a significant family gathering, my parents' 50th wedding anniversary. Eleanor, naturally, had taken charge of the arrangements. She'd booked a ridiculously expensive country club venue, insisted on a sit-down dinner with a 5-course menu, and hired a string quartet, all under the guise of making it truly special. My parents, always practical and a little overwhelmed by Eleanor's extravagance, had tried to suggest a more relaxed affair, perhaps a catered barbecue at their lake house, but Eleanor had waved them away. "Nonsense, darling. 50 years. It deserves the very best. And besides," she'd added, with a significant glance at my mother, "some people's careers aren't exactly conducive to hosting large events, are they?" The day itself was a blur of forced smiles and over-the-top decorations. Eleanor was in her element, a conductor orchestrating a symphony of her own making. The string quartet played impeccably, the champagne flowed, and Liam looked impossibly handsome in his tuxedo, completely oblivious to the undercurrent of tension. My parents, radiant despite the fuss, moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations. It was during the speeches, just after my father had delivered a heartfelt, tear-jerking tribute to my mother, that Eleanor seized her moment. She stood up, a glittering vision in emerald green, and cleared her throat. The chatter in the room subsided. She raised her glass, her smile a little too wide. To my dearest friends and family, she began, her voice carrying perfectly. And especially to my wonderful parents-in-law. 50 years. A truly remarkable achievement. She paused, letting the anticipation build. Then, her gaze found my mother, who was seated beside my father, her hand resting on his arm. And to Sarah, Eleanor continued, her tone shifting, becoming laced with that familiar condescension. 50 years of unwavering support for this man. And for all these years, Sarah, you've been the pillar of strength, the quiet force behind the scenes. While some of us, she gestured vaguely, have had more demanding careers, managing the household, raising children, ensuring everything runs smoothly. She took a delicate sip of her champagne, her eyes twinkling with a manufactured sweetness. It's important, you know, to appreciate those who choose to focus on the work, the foundations of family, rather than chasing after fleeting professional accolades. It takes a special kind of woman to understand that her true purpose lies in nurturing, not in whatever it is you do in that office, Sarah. The silence that followed was absolute. The string quartet faltered, then stopped altogether. My mother's hand tightened on my father's arm. Her face, moments before flushed with happiness, turned ashen. I felt a cold dread wash over me, a physical sickness. Eleanor, basking in the stunned silence, offered a dismissive little laugh. Oh, don't look so shocked. It's the truth, isn't it? Some people are just built for different things. She then turned to Liam, her eyes sparkling. Darling, pass your mother another canopy, won't you? She looks like she needs it. That was the tipping point. It wasn't just the words, it was the calculated cruelty, the public humiliation delivered with such practiced ease. It was the utter lack of empathy, the blatant disregard for my mother's feelings, the smug certainty of her own superiority. In that moment, something inside me snapped. The simmering resentment boiled over into a cold, hard resolve. The next few weeks were a quiet storm. I didn't confront Eleanor. I didn't tell Liam about the full extent of my plan. I simply acted. My parents, still reeling from the anniversary party, were unaware of the machinations occurring behind the scenes. My mother, bless her, was trying to move past it, attributing Eleanor's outburst to stress or perhaps too much champagne. But I knew better. It began with a series of carefully worded emails to my father. He was, as I mentioned, a retired architect, meticulous and deeply organized. He also, as it turned out, was the executor of his sister's will. Eleanor had always been very direct about her financial affairs. She'd made it clear, in numerous family gatherings, that her substantial estate would be divided amongst her children and her beloved nieces and nephews. However, my father had always insisted on proper legal documentation for everything, including his own passing. He'd also, years ago, drafted a contingency plan for his siblings, should they ever face significant financial hardship or, in his words, demonstrate a sustained pattern of destructive behavior towards others. I remembered a conversation with my father years ago. He'd been showing me some of his old professional files, a deep dive into legacy planning and estate management. He'd said, with a rare twinkle in his eye, you know, Sarah, Eleanor has always been very. She expects things to just fall into her lap. It's important to have safeguards, not just for yourself, but for others who might be caught in the crossfire of someone's particular worldview. He'd then shown me a document, a codicil to Eleanor's will, drafted and notarized by him and 2 other respected members of their community, which stipulated that any beneficiary who engaged in acts of public slander, deliberate emotional sabotage, or sustained demeaning behavior towards immediate family members, would have their inheritance significantly reduced, with the remaining portion to be allocated to a charitable foundation of the executor's choosing. He'd explained it was a safeguard against her often volatile temper and her tendency to alienate people with her sharp tongue. My father, it turned out, had been anticipating Eleanor's behavior for decades. He had the foresight. He had the documentation. And I, with his quiet, almost imperceptible blessing, was about to execute it. I contacted my father, not with alarm, but with a carefully constructed request. I framed it as wanting to understand the finer points of estate law, a professional interest. He agreed to meet me at his study, a place of quiet order filled with the scent of old paper and pipe tobacco. He didn't ask why. He simply opened a specific, unmarked file. Inside were several documents. The codicil. A notarized transcript. Of the anniversary party speeches, compiled from discreet recordings made by a few close family friends who were also aware of Eleanor's behavior. And a formal complaint, detailing multiple instances of Eleanor's past transgressions, meticulously documented with dates and context. My father had anticipated this. The next step was a carefully worded letter, drafted by a lawyer I'd consulted discreetly, addressed to Eleanor's solicitor. It didn't accuse. It presented facts. It laid out the evidence, the codicil, and the clear violation of its terms. It stated, with chilling politeness, that based on the evidence presented and the terms of the codicil, a significant portion of Eleanor's inheritance would be redirected. The legal jargon was precise, unforgiving. I included a copy of the notarized complaint and the transcript, and a list of potential charities that the redirected funds would benefit, organizations dedicated to mental health awareness and support for victims of emotional abuse. I didn't send it directly. I had my lawyer send it. And I waited. The first sign of trouble was a frantic text message from Liam. Mom's lawyer just called. Something about clauses? Inheritance changes? She's freaking out. What is going on? Then came the barrage. My Aunt Carol, a notorious gossip and Eleanor's closest confidant, started calling, her voice a shrill siren of indignation. How could you? How could you do this to your mother-in-law? She's devastated. You've ruined her. And for what? A few mean words at a party? Flying monkeys, I thought, a grim satisfaction stirring within me. They were all circling, ready to defend their queen. Then, silence. A deafening, heavy silence from Eleanor herself. The usual texts, the passive-aggressive emails, the invitations to family functions she'd orchestrated, all stopped. Liam, however, was a mess. He called me, his voice trembling. Sarah, Mom's lawyer said, she's losing almost half. Half. She's crying, she's yelling, she says this is all your fault. She says you deliberately targeted her. Is this true? Did you do this? I took a deep breath, the air feeling cleaner, lighter. Liam, I said, my voice calm, steady, and utterly devoid of emotion. Your mother's words at the anniversary party had consequences. Your father, bless him, made sure of that. He anticipated this. He put safeguards in place. And she crossed a line. A very clear line. There was a stunned silence on his end. But it was just words. She didn't anything. She attacked my mother, Liam, I said, my voice hardening just a fraction. Publicly. Cruelly. My mother, who has dedicated her life to caring for others. Your mother, who has always felt entitled to belittle anyone who doesn't meet her impossibly high standards. Your father chose to protect his sister, and by extension, his family, from her destructive behavior. And I simply helped him ensure those protections were enacted. The fallout was swift and brutal for Eleanor. The whispers started, then the outright pronouncements from those who had been on the receiving end of her venom over the years. Family members who had previously tolerated her behavior now saw an opportunity. Friends began to distance themselves. Her carefully constructed social edifice began to crumble. She was no longer the benevolent matriarch, she was a woman who had been publicly shamed, her entitlement stripped away, her wealth diminished. The sheer indignity of it all, of losing her fortune not to some grand tragedy, but to a clause in her own will, a consequence of her own words, was a bitter pill to swallow. She had underestimated the quiet strength of my parents, and she had gravely underestimated me. Liam eventually came around, slowly, painfully. He saw the damage Eleanor had inflicted, the pain she had caused, not just on my mother, but on him, on the entire family. He began to understand that his passive acceptance had been a form of enabling. The social consequences for Eleanor were profound. Her reputation, meticulously cultivated for decades, was tarnished. The arrogance that had once been a source of power was now a mark of her downfall. There were no grand pronouncements, no triumphant declarations. Just a quiet, profound shift. My mother, free from the constant weight of Eleanor's judgment, began to unfurl. Her smile returned, brighter and more genuine than I had seen it in years. She spoke with renewed confidence about her work, about her life, no longer hedging or downplaying. Liam and I, though the path ahead was undoubtedly complex, found a new, honest foundation for our relationship, built on the difficult truths we had finally faced. And Eleanor? She was left with her diminished fortune, her tarnished reputation, and the echoing silence of a family that had finally learned to protect itself. The satisfaction was not in her ruin, but in the quiet, undeniable justice that had finally arrived, 3 weeks after the mocking words had been spoken. It was a chilling, absolute quiet.